Alright, let's talk about a couple more movies. One that's the new release from this weekend, and one that was a new release about 3 weeks ago. And I am finally seeing Everything Everywhere All at Once early next week. So we'll finally be able to talk about that. But in the meantime, let's talk about Fantastic Beasts 3, which for some reason is called The Secrets of Dumbledore, which could have easily been fixed by at least calling it The Secret of Dumbledore, but yeah, because what I'm guessing what another one of these secrets is something that hasn't been a secret for quite some time now. So, um, yeah, and it's obviously a lead-in from the twist of sorts that happened. Well, not even of sorts. I guess twist. I guess you could call it. That happened at the very end of the second movie, which left a lot of people leaving that one saying, "Why and where is this going? And do we even care?" It is really funny how when you go back to how big the Potter universe was when the actual Harry Potter movies were coming out, and how it was something so enormous and so iconic and such an event, that you would think flashing forward to now, where we have movies still coming out in this world, and just how much it seems. I mean, obviously the fan base is there somewhere for sure, especially if you look for them. But I feel like for the most part, for a while now, it's been like, all right, there's another one of these, I guess. If I see this, it'll really just kind of be out of curiosity more than anything else. Don't really know what's happening in the story anymore, or which characters serve which purpose. And it's like, at the end of the day, am I even going to care by the time it gets to it? Like, is there anything else that can be revealed about this world, especially being a prequel world? That's like, because we know the direction eventually all these characters end up in, most of them. But yeah, so it's like you go into this just kind of looking for a reason to care, I guess. And if you come out on the other side of it just a little bit like, oh, that was kind of fun, I guess, or oh, there are certain aspects to it that I liked about it or were fun or whatever, um, then there's some success story in there, but not really enough to having created this whole separate franchise that's supposed to lead us into the Potter world that we know and grew up with. So, yeah. Um, and what's interesting about this though is that one of the critiques that you heard a lot when the first two came out was, maybe it's J.K. Rowling writing the scripts herself. Like, yeah, you know, books and world building is one thing, and screenplays are another thing. And that's why all but one of the Potter movies was written by Steve Kloves, who is the credited writer on this. So it's like, so there's decent sign. I think the only thing Kloves didn't write was Order of the Phoenix, which is funny because I often hear that cited as the least good Potter movie by a lot, not everybody, but by a lot of people. So the only trouble is that regardless of the writer that you bring into this, there's still a lot that's already been established in a really sloppy way, and all this sloppiness is still here that we're picking up from to go into this. All these different story points, all these different characters, many of which are hard to remember what they're even doing here and what their purpose is. But to start off with immediately, we do have one of the plot lines that's relatively easy to follow. That being the Dumbledore Grindelwald one thing, and not just their rivalry, but their relationship prior to that and how it has gotten to this point. A lot of which is still pretty vague, 3 movies in, but we do get this great scene at the start, this good scene at the start, like, of Jude Law still playing Dumbledore, and now Grindelwald being played by Mads Mikkelsen. And the first thing you might notice here is that there's no explanation for why Johnny Depp suddenly looks like Mads Mikkelsen now. And why he doesn't have, like, the full white look like he did. Like, he just kind of looks like Mads Mikkelsen with a little bit of, like, white or gray in the hair. And I was thinking about that going in, and I was like, before I even went into the movie, I was thinking, like, do I want them to come up with an explanation for why he looks different? Because in this universe, it'd be really easy, but at the same time, regardless of what it could have been, would it have been one of those cases of I think it's because the recasting was so high profile. Like if it was just like a random side character and it was actors that you didn't quite recognize, at least they're not near as recognizable as Depp and Mickelson are. Where it would just be a throwaway line like, "Oh, it was they did this sort of thing and now he looks different." You would think whatever, but it's like because this was such a high profile recasting, I feel like any explanation they would have come up with would have just felt like, oh, it's so obvious that that's what they're going. Like, all it would have done was draw attention to the fact that there was a recasting instead of. So I actually like it better that they didn't acknowledge it at all, and just kind of went forward and just like, hey, you know who this guy is. He's the guy from before, and we're just gonna go with the movie now. Because you know that because you saw the news, you read the headlines and stuff, and so I do think that works better. That it didn't really like all it would have done was draw attention to itself. So that I don't really mind. And as far as Grindelwald being Mads Mikkelsen now, it is one of those cases that's difficult because it's really annoying that Johnny Depp isn't in this. But at the same time, it's like, I don't think anybody was going into this holding anything against, Mads Mikkelsen or anything. Just more so the fact that this may have been unnecessary. And the idea that kind of adapting to what is essentially a different performance, and in essence feels like a different character, which in one case I guess you could say feels somewhat appropriate because despite the fact that Depp is also in the end of the first movie, technically you can say for pretty much the entirety of the first movie, Grindelwald is played by Colin Farrell, even though he's posing as somebody else. It's still this sort of interesting ongoing thing that Grindelwald is like a different face in every movie. But another way that you could easily explain, his appearance change, but as far as like the performance itself, while you can sense that it's a different performance, and it might not completely feel like the same character, and because of that, whether his performance or his face, it's starting the movie with this scene between him and Jude Law was a really good way to start and establish that immediately, because if there was something established between the two of them as actors in this scene that worked, that was going to be kind of the final thing to get us to sort of just run with the fact that just Grindelwald's a different person now. And yeah, this scene is really good between the two of them, and they establish a lot, and they say a lot using their actual, acting abilities because they're Jude Law and Mads Mikkelsen. They have plenty. And they use them to the best of their ability to establish this scene and their relationship, and without an overabundance of exposition or stuff that we already know being thrown at us. Just like kind of getting to see, because there's not really, because another thing that's kind of going in Mikkelsen's favor here, as far as his performance and how he performs with Law, is the fact that there was never really much established between the two of them anyway, as far as like screen time in the previous movie. So it does kind of feel like this was a fresh jumping off point anyway, regardless of how deep into the story we already are, and the stuff that we already knew long ago about these characters. So yes, I was able to fall into that relatively easily, but at the same time I just kept wondering like how different Death's performance would have been and how different the movie would have been for that, and if it would have been a bit more enticing in a sense, because while Mikkelsen is good, there was definitely something much more theatrical about what Depp was doing in a good way. Like another reason that it's annoying that Depp isn't in this is because Depp was the best thing about the last movie, by far. So it was like that was the one thing that I kind of took away from the last movie that I remember vividly. But yeah, and his appearance was just much more striking, and he looked much more like this sort of otherworldly character that just by the sight of him, you're immediately drawn to him, which is something that Depp tried a lot in the not so great stages of his career prior to this, where it was all about like the costumes and the makeup and stuff, and a lot of it was just character stuff that didn't really work. And didn't draw in the way that it's supposed to, like this does, where you immediately are just drawn to him by his appearance, and then when the performance happens, takes you there. But yeah, but with all that missing, it does feel like there's a flair that's not quite in this movie that could have been. But once again, that has nothing to do really with Mickelson's performance in itself, because that works just as fine with what he has to work with here, and being a replacement actor. So there's that. Um, we do have a lot of returning characters because there's so many characters in this world now, in this story. As far as side characters go, we do have Dan Fogler back, who's been a really welcome presence in this world, because I talked recently in one of our videos from like a week or two ago about how I never really cared for David Yates as a director on these movies, despite the fact that he's done well over half of them now. But I find his direction to be just kind of really one note, and everything just kind of has that dark, same look to it, without anything really, no like visual aesthetic really stands out or anything. They all just kind of look the same. But Fogler is able to bring like this sort of comedic nature to it that's not too over the top and not too like whenever his character does something comedic, it doesn't feel like we're completely breaking away and going into a completely different movie like bad comedy relief tends to do. So he's always been welcome here, and we also have characters that have just been here just a tiny bit, like Bunty, who I was kind of glad to see have much more of a part in this. I mean, and obviously a lot of these returning characters and the newer characters seem to be kind of going around the fact that Catherine Waterston's barely in this. She has like one very, very small scene. And I could get kind of irritated with that, especially since it feels obvious that it seems like other characters are kind of filling in for her. But as much as I do really like Catherine Waterston in general, Tina's honestly never really been a character I was that attached to in these movies. because it doesn't really feel like she was in the second one much at all either, that I remember. And I keep forgetting that her and Newt are supposed to be like in love, because I kind of just keep forgetting that she exists, with how like smaller and smaller her role is getting throughout this, but how much of an impression she kind of left anyway. I mean, I do like her a lot in the first movie. Like I said, as far as like with all the other characters going on here, she kind of gets sort of lost in the mix, and doesn't really feel like too much is lost pushing around that I've noticed. But that could just be because she hasn't had a chance, apart from the first movie, to show that she's valuable to this cast. So that could be what that is, and not necessarily Tina as a character. But right now, I stand by that. I was never really attached to Tina anyway, so there's that. It's either way. As far as Jude Law playing Dumbledore, I do like, because I was one of those people that was just really attached to the idea of it being Jared Harris when they hadn't cast him yet, and it's like, because that just would have been as perfect as you could get. But while Law didn't really have too much of a presence that I remember in the second movie, he does get a lot more here to do, and I do like that he has much more of a, because I'm much more about the Richard Harris Dumbledore than I am Gambit. I'm much like the warmth of Dumbledore rather than the, one that's ready to beat everybody to death. But but the thing here is that there are moments here where you can see like the early makings of the Richard Harris Dumbledore. Like there's one particular scene that he has with Jacob, the Dan Fogler character, and he says something to him that sounds exactly like something Richard Harris's Dumbledore would have said to Harry in the way that he says it too, on top of what he's saying. And it's stuff like that where you can kind of start to see, because it's weird when you see this guy that Jude Law is playing that's wearing like the vests and the scarves and stuff like that, and to imagine that he eventually becomes, the wizard with the robes and the hat and stuff like that. It's like, it feels like two completely different people, but little moments like that where the emotion kind of comes through and just his delivery and warmth can come through, you kind of start to see the Richard Harris Dumbledore kind of falling into place a little bit, which is great. Those aren't as often as I would like them to be, but I really appreciate them when they are there, because they are effective. Then we have some characters that are coming. I'm pretty sure were in the second movie. Yusuf, I know for sure, was in the second movie. Lita's brother, I think, or half-brother or something. And he's here, and he's given an important job to do, but at the same time he also kind of feels like an extra in a lot of cases. Which is kind of what happened to Ezra Miller also, it feels like, but with like Yusuf, we get this one scene where it is like he gets like an Eternal Sunshine moment. That's a pretty big moment for a movie like this, especially in the place that it is within the movie. Um, and like I was saying with Ezra Miller, also obviously all of these the storyline has been really focused on what's happening to Credence, and that's the direction we've been going for a while now. And because of that, it is interesting how he does feel very sidelined in this movie, um, because because he comes in and he's essentially a villain of the movie, but we know eventually what is because we know what's inside this character potentially. We know that there's eventually going to be this sort of we can see where this character is going, and the movie doesn't seem really interested at all in hitting any other beats apart from those ones that we know. Like even little side beats where it kind of toys with the idea of, oh, is he going to stay bad or is he going to turn good? We honestly can't tell. There's the reason that we can always tell is that, like I was saying, there's the scene where the scenes where he has like action beats, and then he has like interactions with Dumbledore, where you can kind of see, you know, a good side of him starting to come out, because we know his whole thing with Samantha Morton to start off with, and how he was abandoned and then abused and all that. And how there's always room for turnaround there for a character like this. But any time he's on the stage where he's like under Grindelwald's power, he's just literally an extra. He's just in the background, and we don't really get much of a sense between the two of them that he's like this really ardent follower that he's supposed to be. And the same thing kind of happens to Queenie also, where it felt like this sort of... I remember it being like this kind of big, almost shocking moment in the second movie, when Queenie sort of went to Grindelwald's side, but that's almost practically non-existent in this movie. It's like sort of like when Jacob supposedly got his memory wiped, and then suddenly he just kind of didn't. They just say it didn't work. Stuff it feels kind of wiped away in that sense. But there is another character here that I can't remember if she was in the second movie or not, but she feels new, and that is Jessica Williams. And first of all, I just love this actress in general. There is a movie on Netflix called The Incredible Jessica Jones or James. I can't. I really like the movie, but I can't remember the fucking title. But you really need to seek that out, because this actress is so charming and hilarious and lovely, and I love that she's in big stuff like this now, and she definitely adds something here, especially that she sort of fills that void that, you know, where Tina's kind of missing. I think it's because I like Jessica Williams so much is another reason why it was like, I'm just really not thinking about Tina anyway, so yeah. It's Jessica James, I'm pretty sure, but Googling, you'll find it. And you should find it. So, as far as this being a Fantastic Beasts movie, you're gonna want, you know, like, the adventure aspect, and the wonder aspect, and the magic aspect, and stuff like that, which is kind of the unfortunate thing about the Fantastic Beasts movies, is they seem to be having trouble finding that. Because I rewatched the first one recently, remembering that this one was on the horizon, and I do really like that one, because it's basically got everything in it that you sign up for. It is mostly just them, like, beasts get loose, and then they have to go find them. And that's basically the movie, with, you know, all this... There's stuff going on the sidelines that's building up to all this other stuff. And you got the John Voight subplot and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's really just them looking for the beasts that have escaped. And it's really fun. And that's kind of what a lot of these should remain, I think. Because there's definitely intrigue with the Dumbledore Grindelwald stuff, but the way it meshes with like Newt's stuff that's going on is where it kind of feels like it falls apart trying to jumble together. But like separately they do work. I feel like all the individual scenes in this movie, I feel like were, well, for about an hour and a half of this movie, the individual scenes were really working by themselves. But then as we get later and they start to try to form one story with all these characters in one place, it's a lot, and it starts to fall apart. But still, what I was talking about, one of the characters I didn't mention yet, out of all the characters, is Newt. And the funny thing is that it does feel like that Newt is starting to get sidelined despite supposedly being the main character of this series, but it feels like he's been getting pushed out since like early in the second movie, because they want all these other plots to happen. And there's aspects of this that are just significantly less interesting than other parts of it. And what's funny is the parts that are more interesting are the simpler things. The stuff that isn't just cluttering plots in as much as they can, and as many characters as they can, as many conflicts as they can. It's just, sometimes just Newt with the beasts is all we need, and there's a decent amount of that in this movie, and I was like, every time Newt was on screen, it was like, yeah, I'm really glad we're going this direction. Like, I'm glad they haven't completely sidelined him yet. And so we get stuff like, at the beginning, when he's, like, kind of rescued, and we see that creature that, like, carries him off, is really great, and the kind of stuff that I feel like you come to this movie for. Like that sort of magical sense that you would get, when you watch the Potter movies. And then there's this whole segment where he's in, like, a prison cave, and there are, like, these scorpion-esque creatures, and there's this really incredible balance that they find in that scene, where this really goofy thing is happening, how he is able to control or tame these scorpion creatures that are surrounding him. And while this sort of funny, goofy thing is happening, like, there's also gruesome deaths happening in this scene, in this really darkly funny way that's really hard to describe how they balanced it. And it's like, more of that stuff would have been, like, more of, like, the way he tamed those creatures, and the mixing in of, like, darkness in this really bizarre way, but, funny and effective way. I feel like is where you can see glimpses of what these movies really should be, without all this other stuff coming in. But, and we also get, the creatures that we already know, like I can't remember his name now, the one he always carries around in his pocket that's like a plant that can pick locks, is always fun. And he's, like, even more emotive now than he's ever been, despite just being essentially a stick with leaves. And then we have the Niffler, Teddy, who has this great moment. Once again, these moments of humor that just really work, I think, because the rest of the movie is just so dark and gloomy intentionally. When it doesn't complete... Like, I get having darkness and gloominess. We even talked about that when we were talking about the original series, where it's like, I get it, the more adult they got, the darker the series got and all that, and, like, it makes sense to a degree. But it's like, that doesn't excuse being one note in, like, all aspects because of it. So to have these moments where you have, like, Teddy diving through the air and staying true to his character in this, like, slow motion moment is hysterical, and I love that stuff. And it's like the way that, because you could say that we were talking about, Dan Foley, we were talking about how sometimes comedy relief can, like, seem like it comes from a different movie and be really out of place and be really inappropriate with the rest of the context. But yeah, when the light nature of this movie would come through, it's like you could get a sense it wasn't out of place. It's what the movie's missing, when it's being its dark and gloomy self, because that's what it usually is. And these moments just happen to come through and say, like, hey, remember, these light moments can exist, and they do exist, just not as frequently as they maybe should, or not have as much focus as they maybe should. But that's the thing, is when you talk about bringing in subplots and other characters and stuff like that, I talked about the John Voight subplot in the first movie, where they brought in, like, political figures as plot devices. And it's like, that's the portion of the story that you watch in the first movie, and you're just like, who the fuck cares? Like, of all the things that you come to a movie set in the Potter universe to see, it's probably not that... Like, the Star Wars prequels had the same criticism thrown at it, where it was like, you go to a Star Wars movie to see, lightsaber battles and all these different creatures and all these different planets, all these different worlds, and you get politics, like in-world, in-universe politics. Riveting. And that can be intriguing, story-wise to an extent. But when it basically envelops the plot and becomes the thing, and you're missing all these other elements that are in here, but just are absent for long periods of time. And so, once it gets to that political angle, it just feels more like a detour, much like the John Voight storyline did, even though they're trying to make it like it's a very central plot point. Especially for Grindelwald's storyline. And the whole thing they're clearly setting up here because, it's set in Germany and we're heading in that territory of World War II. It's just very obvious what's going on here, and it's just kind of unnecessary. Like I said, when you got all this other stuff in this world that you can use to tell stories, it's like this angle just feels so lazy and uninspired, and not a great use of these characters that are that could otherwise be larger than life. It's like I'm trying to imagine the Depp performance and the Depp appearance with this political angle. And it's like, just the imagery of that could have been interesting, but because Mads Mikkelsen just looks like Mads Mikkelsen, and like I said, he's not like as theatrical of an actor as Depp is, might hinder it a little bit, despite the fact that I said that I wouldn't hold anything against his performance itself, as far as comparing it to Depp. But in that sense, I would be curious to see, what a Depp cut would look like. But, yeah, so... And eventually we get, some obvious stuff, like, eventually whenever we go to Hogwarts, we do get, the old theme, and there's various places here where we get, like, the old classic score that we recognize from the Potter world, and it's, it's clear fan service stuff. There's still something about it that works. Like, I don't get cynical when we get to those bits, because it's still something happens when you see Hogwarts and you hear John Williams. It's just there, inherently, forever. So I don't really have anything to complain about with that. But I guess the main thing is that while they do have a lot of individual parts here that are working, like I was saying, it all comes down to how they come together in, like, the second portion of the movie, and that's where it kind of starts to fall apart, and you start to realize why these movies are not the phenomenon that the previous series was, and why they probably won't be, and we're far enough in it now that we're probably beyond them finding their footing completely. They might be able to stick a few landings here and there, but we're so convoluted at this point, it'd be really hard to see how they're going to come out of this, especially since it's just getting riddled with scandals, because obviously we've got the whole Depp thing going on, and it's like, was it a good idea or a bad idea to fire him? Probably a bad one. Ezra Miller doing whatever the fuck Ezra Miller's doing, and it's unfortunate, because there's so many, talented people involved in this that could have told really, really great stories, really fun stories in this world, and it's just hard to tell what's happening with this whole thing, where it's like you see glimpses here of stuff that could really, really work, and stuff that does grab your attention, and stuff that's like, yes, this is what I'm here for. And then there's, like, just as much stuff that says, like, who gives a shit? Why are we spending 2.5 hours on this? I don't know. So, yeah, it's all over the damn place. But I think that's what people expect at this point. But it wasn't the disaster. Like, I went into this, like, really begrudgingly. Like, I was almost sighing when I was buying the ticket, but it wasn't like that. And it's not... And I don't even necessarily hate the second movie the way a lot of people do. I just remember it being, much like this, just very dull and all over the place. And not having as many moments, like, outside of Depp, that really showed what the world is capable of, which is what we did see quite a bit. Anytime we saw, like, creatures and beasts and stuff like that in this movie, there were glimpses of, yes, this is what this needs to be, and it's clear that you still have it. You just need to stick to it and know what's working about these stories and what isn't. But once again, when you're so deep in it now, it's like you can't really just cut storylines or end them abruptly, so now you've just backed yourself into a corner. So even bringing, Steve Kloves in, still, he can only do so much to dig you out of this hole. But, it's... I guess we'll see how this continues, if they can continue it. I guess we'll also see as far as, like, the success rate, because, it keeps looking like it's gonna be, each one is less successful than the last, but, still, I was in there early this afternoon, and there was a lot of people in there, and there were a lot of people, you know, because as I was looking over the showtimes to decide which one I was going to, they were pretty well booked, so I'll be curious to see how that turns out, and if they're going. I think I heard they want to make like 2 more. So I guess we will see, but yeah, that's all I guess we can. It's like I'm not. I wouldn't go into a next one as begrudgingly as I went into this one, which is helped by this being an improvement on the Crimes of Grindelwald. But once again, it's like, how far does your anticipation go for this story that's so all over the place? I don't know. But we'll see what happens. So let's quickly go into a movie that I'm really, really having to dig through my memory to get back to, because I saw it when it came out, and that's The Lost City. So, The Lost City was a movie I went into knowing pretty much nothing. Like, I didn't see really any... I mean, I know they were around, but I didn't see any trailers. I avoid trailers, but I didn't, like, even hear any trailers or any TV spots or anything like that. I just saw, like, banner ads every now and then, and I saw the poster. And was thinking, like, oh, that looks interesting that it's, like, not, you know... It looks like a sort of old-fashioned blockbuster type of thing, and it doesn't appear to be based on anything. But at the same time, I imagined that it would be, you know, homaging a lot of stuff, and sure enough, that's what's going on here. But the idea of putting together Channing Tatum and Sandra Bullock, and throwing Daniel Radcliffe in there, I didn't know about Brad Pitt till much later. Like, when I discovered Brad Pitt was in it, I think it was by way of Wikipedia, I thought I'd come across a spoiler by accident, but it's like, no. I talked around, and everybody knew that Brad Pitt was in this movie. Apparently, he's in the advertisements and the trailers and stuff like that. So it was like, oh, that's interesting that he's so low. But at the same time, we'll get to that. But yeah, so this idea of I remember I saw a headline that was advertising it as a romantic comedy, but it was clearly also having this adventure vibe to it. And it's like, with people with as much screen presence as Channing Tatum and Sandra Bullock, who can make, you know, a lot of fun out of movies that seem like terrible concepts. Both of them have perfected that at this point. It's like, okay, let's you know, see what, like, you go in relatively optimistic but not expecting too much, and that's pretty much what you're going to get out of it. Like, pretty much anything you expect out of, like, I didn't even watch trailers or TV spots or anything like that. I just saw promotional pictures and the genres it was being labeled as, and it was exactly what I thought it would be. So if that's the kind of thing that comforts you going into a movie, then this is pretty much exactly what that is. And it's stuff that we recognize. It's got, you know, people that are out of their element in the adventure scenario and the unlikely romance, all the stuff that we've seen a billion times before. Mostly like in the 80s and then forward. But there were moments in this, especially related to Channing Tatum, that gave me hope early, because you always kind of have faith in Sandra Bullock. She's been doing this for a long time and has been reliable for a very long time. But at the same time, she is playing a character that's very obvious, and a character that we know, a character she's played many times. And there were multiple times in this movie, though, where Channing Tatum was just on screen. Like, it would just cut to him, or he would walk into the room or something, and I would just laugh. Because he's just that... He's so in tune with what his strengths are, and how to make a scene work. Like, there's a moment where he walks onto a stage, and just the way he sits on a stool is very, very funny. And it's like, even the opening shot, like, it's just the opening shot of them laying there, and Tatum's got, like, the long hair, and just the opening shot of just them laying there silently made me laugh as soon as I saw it. And that kind of stuff will go a long way for a movie like this, where you expect, you know, everything that's going to happen, you know, the exact formula and all that. So it's really up to the two of them and their charm, and they're knowing exactly what they're doing in these scenarios, that's going to really push this movie. And whether that works entirely is another thing, but, like, everything, you know, commendable to them as far as knowing what to do with this, but that still does leave the movie itself which does leave a lot to be desired. I will say, I did learn something since I saw this, which is one of the things I wrote down was the movie just looked really dark, like visually. And I couldn't tell if there was like a projector problem or if just the movie looked dark, which would be bad. Sort of like Solo, where like just everything, like the entire first 20 minutes might as well have been a black screen. But last week I saw Ambulance in the same auditorium that I saw The Lost City in, and I think it is a projector problem because the ambulance looked dark too. So that's nothing I'm putting against this movie, it turns out. So, which sucks because that must, like, by the looks of it, I'm assuming this movie must be relatively bright given the setting. So that's probably something I kind of missed out on that kind of adds a bit more flair to the movie and a bit more likability to the movie. Just not looking gloomy in general. Um, but yeah, so once this plot kicks into gear that involves these people that are completely out of their element, getting into this, jungle set adventure and getting everything that you expect out of that, we do have a villain here in Daniel Radcliffe who was giving me very unfortunate vibes of his character in Now You See Me Too, which is one of the worst movies ever, obviously, but once again, he's trying to bring that same energy that he really, really tried to save that movie with, but nothing was going to save that movie. And the trouble with Radcliffe here isn't really him, because we've praised him before, even in really, really shitty movies. It's these decisions that he's made since his post-Potter career, where he's just going out in these really wild-ass roles and just doing all the weird shit that seems to be getting offered to him. And really pursuing those things. And so, going into a role like this where he can be relatively over the top and he can be like, a standard bad guy but with a little bit of flair, is fun, but once again, much like our two leads, it's like the material that he's given doesn't really give him much to work with, so it's really all on his shoulders, and he can only do so much. And like they do stuff like give him the name Abigail, which I'm guessing they were going for a laugh there, but it's hard to tell. I don't know. But it's because I don't know if it's just because some of it's so dry, or if it's just not landing, or what. But I'm not really feeling giving it the benefit of the doubt. It's probably just not landing. And it's not just like a dryness thing or anything like that. But yeah, then we meet our other character in Brad Pitt, which I won't say too much about, but it's that thing where before I even went into this movie, because I heard the type of character he was playing, the joke becomes very obvious. Like I said, if you know Brad Pitt's place in this movie, you know the punchline to his character before you even walk into the theater. And once again, I don't know if that's just part of the charm of the movie, is, knowing it's like the fact that there's no surprises in it is part of that. Where it's like there's this familiarity to it, where it is, paying homage to other movies, and the types of movies that we don't really see as much anymore, like Romancing the Stone types and just general, adventure types. Because it does feel like pretty much every adventure movie we see anymore is just an homage to previous ones. It doesn't feel like we've had like an original for a very long time. And it is kind of hard to find those since the genre's more or less been conquered. But like it's like, so maybe there's a charm in that, but it also just makes the movie feel really sort of insignificant in general. Especially when there's a lot of the jungle scenes where it's like if they'll go up to like a cliff or something, it's clear where like some green screen is and stuff like that. You can almost see the sound stage behind the trees when he and Bullock are just like riffing on each other and stuff like that. And there's nothing really inspired about the action or anything like that. No really big memorable set pieces or anything like that. Even the climax is just kind of there, especially since as far as there being a looming threat apart from just the setting itself, with Radcliffe as this villain, the way he sort of pops in and out, and especially the way he's dealt with at the end, it felt like the writers kept forgetting about his character. Like, it's just like, oh shit, we haven't seen this character for a while, let's just do this. And then, like, I can't stress enough, the way his character is handled, being the villain, obviously it's no spoiler, he's going to be thwarted in some way, was just so weirdly lazy, like it was written at the very last second. It just really, really threw me off. But like I said, that's just kind of a theme for his character. I feel like it's almost like just like the writers forgot about him. Um, Another thing that's really bringing this movie down aggressively as it goes is these characters of Bullock's assistants that we keep cutting back to, who are just really, really having trouble getting jokes to land. Like, I can't remember a single joke of theirs landing, and we keep cutting. Like, it's this continuous thing throughout the movie of cutting back to them, and they're going out to get Bullock. They meet Oscar Nunez. Oscar Nunez, especially, like, everything these characters partake in is just this really. It's weird. It's like they're supposed to be comedy relief in a movie that's already a comedy. So even their existence and their style of comedy amidst everything else is weird and like it doesn't even belong. And like I said, that just none of them can get a joke to land at all. Whether physical comedy or line readings or anything, just none of the jokes with the assistants or Oscar Nunez or anything are landing at all. And there's just this dark void every time they're on screen, and we cut back to them so many times. They basically become main characters by the time we get to the climax. It's ridiculous and really, really brings the movie down a lot. And takes away from what little saving Tatum and Bullock are doing themselves. But yeah, and it's like it's all this stuff like where I was saying that Bullock was like the really right call here because she really knows this territory really well, and it's like if you're gonna do something tongue in cheek, like something that's really really obvious and formulaic, but also want to put some kind of tongue in cheek nature into it. Bullock is definitely the person that you call because she knows that really well and can do it practically do it in her sleep probably. And I said, and Tatum is so aware of his strengths and what he can do and the comedy that he brings. There's one line in particular that is so brief, and he says it like in mid sentence. He like stops himself to say something about Brad Pitt specifically, and it just made me laugh. So this was weeks ago. I still laugh when I think about it, and it's just him saying one thing. He just looks to the sky and he says it, and I just every time I think about that, I just start laughing. So it does have these bright spots here that they get despite the whole movie itself. But like I said, all this stuff about it being formulaic and stuff seems like it could be unintentional, but that doesn't save it. Like it still has like no real staying power. Like I said, I really had to read everything I wrote down over and over again to remember this movie from a few weeks ago. But yeah, apart from like a couple of the big laughs, it's going away more and more, and it's probably gonna vanish from my mind entirely unless I come across it on like it'll be halfway in on cable at some point when you flip by it, when there's nothing else on or the internet's down or something, and it'll be there, I'm sure, and it'll just be doing its job of just existing. And not really hurting anybody, so it's whatever it is. But like I said at the start, if it's the kind of movie you go into where you want to go into it and know every single beat of it, it's exactly what you think it is. So that's what that is. So like I said, the next thing we're going to talk about is Everything Everywhere All at Once, and maybe something else. And then, of course, next Friday we are going to have The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent and The Northman, but there'll be things going on, and I won't be able to see them right when they come out, so it'll be early in the week following that I will get to those, but I cannot wait to talk about them. So we'll have that. So the next thing is whatever Owen or Ashley has planned, and we're going to be talking about The Player on our movie club thing, which will be super fun with everybody. So yeah, so I think that's pretty much all I have to say about those. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.